The lawyer slid the deed transfer across the table without looking up. "Miss Solis, I need you to understand what you're reading." I stared at the document. A name I didn't recognize, printed neatly beside a signature I did. Eleanor's, shaky but unmistakably hers, dated 11 days before she died. "Who is Priscilla Ann Doyle?" I asked. "According to this," the lawyer said, "she's the new owner of your mother-in-law's house." I'd spent 6 years of my life keeping that woman alive. I wasn't about to let a stranger's name on a piece of paper be the end of the story. "My name is Renata Solis. I'm 44, married to David Solis for 19 years, and for 6 of those years, I was the primary caregiver for his mother, Eleanor, through a cancer diagnosis that should have killed her twice before it finally did. This is the story of how a woman none of us had ever heard of walked into Eleanor's final months and walked away with everything Eleanor had always promised us." Before Eleanor got sick. Eleanor Solis was a force before illness ever touched her. A retired school teacher, sharp-tongued and generous in equal measure, she'd raised David and his 2 sisters alone in that same house on Birchwood Lane after her husband left when David was 9. "That house is the only thing I have that's truly mine," she told me once, years before any of this began, standing in her kitchen while I helped her can tomatoes from her garden. "Everything else came from somebody else. That house, I earned." I loved her the way you love a mother-in-law who actually likes you, which is to say, fiercely and without reservation. She'd call me on Sunday afternoons just to talk, not because she needed anything, but because she wanted to hear about my week. "You're the daughter I always wanted," she told me once, half joking, half not. "David got lucky marrying you." I had no idea hearing that, how much weight those words would eventually carry. The diagnosis. Eleanor was 71 when the diagnosis came. Stage 3 ovarian cancer, caught later than anyone wanted. The kind of news that rearranges a family's entire calendar overnight. David's sisters, Wanda and Colette, lived out of state, one in Arizona, one in Oregon. Both had families and jobs that made regular caregiving impossible. That left David and me, an hour away, running a small accounting practice that gave us just enough flexibility to absorb what was coming. "I'll take her to appointments," I told David the week of the diagnosis. "I'll handle the day-to-day. You focus on work and we'll split the rest." David squeezed my hand. "I don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "She's my family too." I meant it completely. I had no idea in that moment how completely those 6 years would consume me. 6 years of caregiving. What followed was a blur of chemotherapy infusions, hospital waiting rooms, medication schedules, and the particular exhaustion that comes from loving someone through a slow decline you can't stop. I drove Eleanor to treatment 3 times a week for the first 2 years. I learned to manage her medications, track her symptoms, argue with insurance companies on her behalf. When the cancer went into remission briefly in year 3, I thought we'd bought her real time. When it came back in year 4, worse than before, I understood we were in this for the long haul, however long that turned out to be. "You didn't have to do all this," Eleanor told me one night, propped up in her hospital bed after a particularly hard round of treatment. "Most daughters-in-law wouldn't." "I'm not most daughters-in-law," I said, "and you're not most mothers-in-law." She laughed, weak but genuine. "That house is going to you and David when I go," she said. "I've told my lawyer already. I want you to know that. Whatever happens with your sisters-in-law, that house is yours. You earned it every single day you sat in this chair." I didn't ask for confirmation beyond that. It felt crass, discussing inheritance while she was still fighting for her life. I simply trusted her, the way I'd trusted her for years. Wanda and Colette's absence. David's sisters called occasionally, sent flowers on holidays, flew in for a handful of major surgeries. But the daily grind, the appointments, the medication management, the 2 a.m. phone calls when Eleanor fell trying to get to the bathroom alone, fell entirely to David and me. "I wish I could do more," Wanda told me during one call, her voice thick with genuine guilt. "The kids' schedules, work, it's just not possible right now." "I understand," I said, and I did. I never resented them for their distance, not really. Everyone manages family obligations differently, and geography makes certain kinds of help impossible, regardless of intention. But I noticed, over the years, a quiet shift in how Eleanor spoke about her daughters versus how she spoke about me. Wanda means well, she'd say. She just isn't here. When it came to me, there was no qualifier, just gratitude, plain and constant. The appearance of Priscilla. Priscilla Doyle entered Eleanor's life during the final 8 months, introduced through a hospice support group Eleanor had started attending on her own, without me, during a period when I'd finally convinced her to accept some outside help managing her care. She's lovely, Eleanor told me after their first meeting. Lost her own husband to cancer 2 years ago. She really understands what this feels like from the inside. I was relieved, honestly. I'd been running myself into the ground for years, and the idea of Eleanor having a peer, someone who understood illness from lived experience rather than just caregiving exhaustion, felt like a genuine gift. Priscilla started visiting twice a week, then 3 times, then almost daily. She brought homemade soup, sat with Eleanor during infusions on the days I couldn't make it, ran small errands. She's been such a comfort, Eleanor told me during one of our Sunday calls, now increasingly filled with stories about Priscilla instead of the usual updates about her garden or David's sisters. I should have paid closer attention to how quickly that comfort became dependence. I didn't. I was exhausted, grateful for the extra support, and entirely unprepared for what that support actually was. The slow isolation. Looking back, the pattern was almost elegant in its patience. Priscilla never criticized me directly. She never suggested Eleanor needed anything other than what David and I provided. She simply, gradually, made herself indispensable in ways that were harder and harder to untangle from genuine friendship. Priscilla thinks I should rest more in the days you're not here, Eleanor mentioned once. She's been managing my pill organizer for me, says it helps her feel useful. That's kind of her, I said, not thinking much of it at the time. Then came small shifts in access. Eleanor's phone, once always answered, started going to voicemail more often when I called during weekday afternoons. Priscilla and I were just finishing up some paperwork, Eleanor explained once, vaguely, when I finally reached her. What paperwork? I asked. Oh, just some end-of-life planning things, Eleanor said. Priscilla's been helping me get organized since she went through it all herself with her husband. She knows exactly what needs to be done. I remember feeling a small flicker of unease at that phrase, end-of-life planning, but I pushed it aside. Eleanor had always been fiercely independent. It wasn't my place to police who she trusted with what. The final decline. Eleanor's health deteriorated sharply in her last 3 months. The cancer had spread aggressively, and hospice care became full-time. I moved into the guest room at her house during that stretch, splitting caregiving duties with a rotating hospice nurse and increasingly Priscilla. You look exhausted, Priscilla told me one evening, finding me at the kitchen table after a particularly hard night. You should let me take a shift. You need rest too. I accepted the offer more than once during those final weeks, grateful for any relief. In hindsight, I understand now that every hour I spent resting was an hour Priscilla spent alone with Eleanor, building whatever foundation she needed for what came next. She's a godsend, Eleanor told David during one visit, gesturing toward Priscilla in the next room. I don't know what we would have done without her these last few months. David nodded, distracted by his own grief, not registering what I now recognize as the early architecture of a con. A strange visit from a lawyer. 6 weeks before Eleanor died, a man I'd never seen before came to the house, briefcase in hand, dressed in a gray suit that felt out of place in Eleanor's modest living room. Who was that? I asked Eleanor after he left. Just handling some paperwork, she said, her voice thinner than it had been, the cancer now affecting her cognition in ways her doctors had warned us about. Priscilla arranged it, said I needed to update some things given how much has changed. What's changed? I asked, an edge creeping into my voice despite my effort to keep it gentle. Just details, Renata, Eleanor said, patting my hand weakly. Don't worry yourself. Everything's being taken care of. I let it go. She was dying. I told myself repeatedly that whatever paperwork she was signing was hers to sign, and that questioning it too aggressively would only add stress to her final weeks. I regret that restraint more than almost anything else from that period. Eleanor's death. Eleanor passed away on a Tuesday morning in early spring, with David holding one hand and me holding the other. Priscilla had been present the night before, but had left just hours earlier, citing exhaustion. The funeral was small, quiet, exactly as Eleanor would have wanted. Wanda and Colette flew in. Priscilla attended as well, seated near the back, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, accepting condolences from people who assumed she'd simply been a close friend from Eleanor's final months. "She talked about you all so much," Priscilla told me at the reception afterward, her voice warm, sympathetic. "You were everything to her, Renata." She said that constantly. I thanked her, still grieving too deeply to notice anything strange in how carefully she'd positioned herself among the family, accepting a level of intimacy with our loss that felt, even then, slightly premature. The reading of the will. 2 weeks after the funeral, our family attorney, a longtime friend of Eleanor's named Marcus Feld, called a meeting to review her estate. "There's something you all need to see before we go further," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside was a deed transfer, dated 11 days before Eleanor's death, transferring full ownership of the house on Birchwood Lane to Priscilla Ann Doyle. "This isn't possible," David said, his voice cracking. "My mother told us for years that house was going to Renata and me." "According to this document," Marcus said carefully, "your mother executed a new deed transfer shortly before her death, along with an updated power of attorney, naming Ms. Doyle as her primary decision-maker for financial matters." I felt the room tilt slightly. "The lawyer who came to the house 6 weeks before she died," I said slowly. "That was for this." "It appears so," Marcus said. Confronting the truth, I drove home that night in silence, the folder sitting on the passenger seat like something radioactive. David sat beside me, staring out the window, saying nothing for the first 20 minutes of the drive. "How does someone convince a dying woman to sign away her house in 6 weeks?" he finally asked. "The same way con artists convince anyone of anything," I said. "Patience, isolation, and access." "You think it was intentional from the start?" "I think," I said carefully, "we need to find out exactly who Priscilla Doyle really is." That night, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop, the same methodical instinct I'd used for 6 years managing Eleanor's medical care, now redirected towards something far darker: researching Priscilla. What I found over the following week unsettled me more than I expected. Priscilla Doyle had no public record of a deceased husband who died of cancer 2 years prior, the story she'd told Eleanor about her own grief. Property records showed no home ownership under her name in the state. Social media profiles were sparse, recently created, populated with generic photos and minimal history. "This woman appeared out of nowhere 8 months ago," I told David. "No digital footprint before that, no verifiable history of the loss she claimed connected her to your mother." David rubbed his temples. "So who is she really?" I kept digging. A property records search in a neighboring county turned up something that made my stomach drop. A deed transfer, nearly identical in structure, executed 2 years earlier, transferring a modest home from an elderly widow named Harriet Voss to a woman named Patricia A. Doyle. "Same initials," I said, staring at the screen. "Different first name, same last name, same middle initial pattern. This isn't her first house." Finding Harriet's family. I tracked down Harriet Voss's family through an obituary listing a surviving daughter, Renee Kowalski, living 2 towns over. I called her directly, uncertain what I'd find on the other end. "I'm sorry to bring up something painful," I said after introducing myself, "but I need to ask you about a woman named Patricia Doyle, who may have been close to your mother before she passed." There was a long silence on the line. "How do you know that name?" Renee finally asked, her voice tight. "Because the same thing may have happened to my mother-in-law," I said. "She died 3 weeks ago. Her house was transferred to a woman named Priscilla Doyle just before her death. I believe it might be the same person." Renee let out a shaky breath. "My mother's house was signed over to a Patricia Doyle 4 days before she died," she said. "We tried to fight it in court. We lost. The woman had power of attorney, a lawyer who backed every document, and my mother's own signature on everything. We didn't have the resources to keep fighting." A pattern emerges. Over the following 2 weeks, working alongside Renee, I identified 2 more cases. An elderly widower in a different county whose home had been transferred to a Priscilla A. Dolan 8 months before his death, and a woman in her 80s whose family had quietly settled a dispute over a property transfer to someone named Ann P. Doyle, rather than pursue an expensive legal battle they weren't confident they could win. 4 names, 4 slight variations. 4 elderly people, all recently widowed or facing terminal illness, all isolated from family in their final months by a woman who inserted herself as an indispensable companion before walking away with their most valuable asset. This isn't a coincidence, I told Marcus Feld when I brought him everything I'd gathered. This is a pattern. A woman who's been doing this for years, targeting isolated, dying people and using the same basic playbook every time. Marcus studied the documents for a long moment. If this is accurate, he said, this goes far beyond a contested inheritance. This is organized elder financial abuse. That changes everything about how we approach this. Building the case. Marcus connected me with a specialist in elder abuse litigation, an attorney named Denise Okafor, who'd handled similar cases involving predatory caregivers and financial exploitation of terminally ill patients. The pattern you've identified is exactly the profile we look for in these cases, Denise told us during our first meeting. Isolation from family, rapid escalation of trust, a hastily arranged power of attorney, and a deed transfer executed while the victim's cognitive capacity was likely compromised by illness or medication. Courts take this seriously when the pattern is this clear across multiple victims. What do we need to prove it? I asked. Medical records showing Eleanor's cognitive state in her final weeks, Denise said. Testimony from hospice staff who observed the relationship. And ideally, the other victims' families willing to come forward as part of a pattern of conduct argument. Renee Kowalski agreed immediately to participate. The second family, once I reached them, agreed cautiously. The third remained hesitant, still exhausted from their own unsuccessful legal battle years earlier. Eleanor's medical records. Denise subpoenaed Eleanor's full medical records from her final 3 months, including hospice notes that documented her cognitive state with clinical precision I hadn't fully appreciated at the time. Patient exhibits periods of confusion, particularly in late afternoon and evening hours, consistent with cancer-related cognitive decline, one nurse's note read, dated just 5 days before the deed transfer was executed. Patient requires reorientation to time and place multiple times per visit. This is significant, Denise said, reviewing the file with us. If Eleanor was experiencing documented confusion around the exact time she signed away her house, that raises serious questions about her capacity to understand what she was signing. I thought back to that vague conversation in her living room. Just details, Renata. Don't worry yourself. I'd attributed her vagueness to fatigue. I understood now it may have been something closer to genuine confusion, carefully exploited by someone who knew exactly how to use it. The hospice nurse's testimony. One of Eleanor's regular hospice nurses, a woman named Carla Jimenez, agreed to speak with Denise about what she'd observed during her visits. I was uncomfortable with how much control Ms. Doyle had over Eleanor's schedule near the end, Carla told us during a recorded interview. She'd often ask me to reschedule visits or shorten them, saying Eleanor needed rest. But I noticed Eleanor seemed more disoriented on the days after longer sessions alone with Ms. Doyle, particularly in that final month. Did you ever report your concerns? Denise asked. I flagged it internally, Carla admitted. But without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, there wasn't much more I could do beyond documentation. I regret not pushing harder. Her testimony, combined with the documented cognitive decline, gave Denise exactly the foundation she needed to challenge the validity of both the power of attorney and the deed transfer. Confronting Priscilla, Denise arranged a formal deposition, requiring Priscilla to answer questions under oath about her relationship with Eleanor and the circumstances surrounding the deed transfer. I attended, sitting quietly beside Denise, as Priscilla answered questions with the same practiced warmth she'd shown throughout Eleanor's final months. Ms. Doyle, Denise began, can you describe how you first met Eleanor Solis? Through a hospice support group, Priscilla said smoothly. We bonded over shared grief. I'd lost my husband to cancer 2 years prior. Can you provide documentation of your husband's death? Denise asked. A death certificate, an obituary, anything verifying that loss? Priscilla's composure flickered just slightly. I don't have those documents readily available. Because there's no record of a husband matching that description in any public database we've searched, Denise said. Isn't it true, Ms. Doyle, that you've used variations of the name Doyle in at least 3 previous instances involving elderly individuals who transferred property to you shortly before their deaths? Priscilla's lawyer objected immediately, but the question had already landed. I watched the woman who'd sat beside my dying mother-in-law for months, wearing her false grief like a costume, finally begin to unravel under direct scrutiny. The other families come forward. Word of our case spread through elder law circles, and within a month, 2 additional families reached out to Denise, describing eerily similar experiences with a woman matching Priscilla's description, operating under yet another name variation in a different region. She's been doing this for at least 6 years across 4 states, Denise told us during a case update, each time targeting isolated, terminally ill, or recently widowed elderly individuals, embedding herself as an indispensable companion, then executing a deed transfer during a documented period of cognitive decline. Why hasn't anyone caught her before now? David asked. Because most families, understandably, don't have the resources or emotional bandwidth to fight a protracted legal battle while grieving, Denise said. She's counted on that exhaustion every single time. You're the first family with both the documentation and the persistence to build a pattern case against her. The court hearing. The case went before a probate judge 8 months after Eleanor's death, combining our challenge to the deed transfer with testimony from Renee Kowalski's case and the 2 newer families who'd come forward. I testified about Eleanor's documented cognitive decline, about the strange lawyer's visit 6 weeks before her death, about the slow isolation I hadn't recognized until it was too late. I trusted my mother-in-law's judgment for years, I told the court. I still trust the woman she was before illness affected her thinking. What I don't trust is a stranger who spent 8 months building access to a dying woman's most vulnerable moments, then walked away with the one thing Eleanor always said was hers to give. Priscilla's attorney argued that Eleanor had acted independently, that the transfer represented genuine gratitude for companionship during her final months. The judge, reviewing the medical records alongside testimony from 3 separate families describing nearly identical patterns, was unconvinced. The ruling. 6 weeks after the hearing, the judge issued a ruling voiding the deed transfer on grounds of diminished capacity and undue influence, restoring the house on Birchwood Lane to Eleanor's estate, to be distributed according to her prior legally sound will, the one drafted years earlier, before Priscilla ever entered her life, naming David and me as primary beneficiaries of the property. The pattern of conduct demonstrated across multiple cases, the judge wrote in his decision, establishes a clear and troubling method of exploitation targeting vulnerable, elderly individuals during periods of documented cognitive impairment. This court finds the transfer invalid. Priscilla Doyle, whose real legal name turned out to be Patricia Ann Dolan, was subsequently referred for criminal investigation into elder financial exploitation across multiple jurisdictions. Standing in Eleanor's kitchen again. The first time I walked back into Eleanor's kitchen after the ruling, I stood at the counter where she'd taught me to can tomatoes years earlier, running my hand along the same worn countertop. "We got it back," I said quietly, to no one in particular, to whatever remained of her presence in that room. David found me there a few minutes later, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "She'd be proud of you," he said. "You didn't just fight for the house. You stopped this woman from doing it to anyone else." "I hope so," I said. "I hope Harriet Voss's family finds some peace in this, too." What the other families found. Renee Kowalski called me the week after the ruling, her voice thick with emotion. "We're reopening our case," she said. "Your ruling sets a precedent. We finally have a real chance." Within the year, 2 of the 3 additional families had successfully challenged their own property transfers using the pattern evidence established in our case. The third family, the one that had settled years earlier, remained unable to reopen their case due to statute of limitations issues, a loss that still weighs on me. We can't undo everything, Denise told me during our final conversation about the case, but you've made it significantly harder for someone like Patricia Dolan to do this again without consequences. Wanda and Colette's reaction. David's sisters, who'd remained largely absent during the caregiving years, reached out after the ruling with a mixture of gratitude and quiet guilt. We should have been more involved, Wanda admitted during a call. Maybe if we had been, none of this would have happened. Maybe, I said, or maybe she would have found another way in regardless. Predators like her are patient. They find the gaps wherever they exist. I didn't say it to absolve them entirely, but I also understood that assigning blame retroactively wouldn't undo what had happened. What mattered now was that Eleanor's actual wishes, the ones she'd expressed clearly for years before illness clouded her judgment, had finally been honored. Eleanor's garden. The house on Birchwood Lane needed work after months of neglect during the legal battle. I spent an entire weekend that spring restoring Eleanor's old vegetable garden, the same one where she'd taught me to can tomatoes, where she told me the house was truly hers because she'd earned it. I earned this too, I said aloud, kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds from beds that hadn't been tended in over a year. Not because a stranger tried to take it, because I showed up every single day for 6 years, the way you deserved. I thought about the version of Eleanor from before the illness, sharp and generous and fiercely protective of the one thing that was truly hers. I hoped, wherever she was, she knew the house had found its way back to exactly where she'd always intended it to go. A warning to other families. Denise asked me, a few months after the case concluded, whether I'd be willing to speak publicly about our experience, to help other families recognize the warning signs before it was too late. People need to understand how gradual this is, I told a small support group Denise organized for families dealing with elder exploitation. It doesn't look like theft in the moment. It looks like kindness. It looks like relief at a time when you're too exhausted to question where that relief is coming from. A woman in the group, caring for her own dying father, asked the question that mattered most. How do I know if it's happening to my family? Watch for isolation, I said. Watch for sudden new friendships that seem to require increasing access to your parents' decisions. Watch for vagueness around paperwork or arrangements. And above all, don't let exhaustion stop you from asking direct questions, even when it feels intrusive. I let exhaustion stop me. I regret that more than almost anything. David and I, 1 year later. A year after Eleanor's death, David and I sat on the back porch of the house on Birchwood Lane, now fully restored and, per the court's ruling, legally ours, exactly as Eleanor had always intended. Do you ever think about how close we came to losing it entirely? David asked, watching the sunset settle over the same garden Eleanor had tended for decades. Every day, I said, but I also think about how many other families never got the chance to fight back the way we did. That's the part that stays with me most. David reached over and took my hand. She knew what she was doing when she chose you, he said, even before any of this happened. She always said you were the daughter she'd chosen, not the one she was given by luck. I thought about Eleanor's voice, weak but certain, in that hospital bed years earlier. That house is going to you and David when I go. You earned it every single day you sat in this chair. She was right. It had taken a court battle, a pattern of fraud across 4 states, and 8 months of quiet, careful investigation to prove it. But in the end, the truth had done exactly what it always eventually does. What I know now. People ask me sometimes if the legal fight was worth the exhaustion, the money, the emotional toll of reliving Eleanor's decline in painstaking detail during depositions and court hearings. I tell them the same thing every time. It wasn't just about the house. It was about refusing to let a predator profit from the specific, calculated cruelty of targeting people at their most vulnerable, dying, isolated, and unable to fully protect themselves. Eleanor deserved better than what Patricia Dolan gave her in those final months. So did Harriet Voss, and the widower in the neighboring county, and every other person whose name I never learned, but whose story likely followed the same quiet, devastating pattern. The house on Birchwood Lane is ours now, legally and completely, exactly as Eleanor intended for years before illness made her vulnerable to someone who understood exactly how to exploit that vulnerability. Some nights, I still walk through Eleanor's garden, tending the same tomatoes she taught me to grow, grateful that the truth, however slow and hard won, eventually found its way home.